sensory processing differences are very common in autistic individuals, and some of their sensory experiences might be enjoyable, but also some can be kind of rather pretty distressing for individuals. So they might struggle with certain lights or sounds, but also touch and sense as well. These sensory processing differences and these challenges can have quite big consequences for the quality of life and the mental wellness of autistic individuals. The sensory environment can make it difficult for autistic individuals to actually access public spaces. And there are many literary accounts of autistic people talking about their experiences of being excluded or feeling very uncomfortable in mainstream spaces because of the sensory environment. And qualitative research supports that autistic people can feel overwhelmed by and often avoid certain public places, such as maybe large shops, but also hospitals and cinemas. But actually, there's been really minimal research that's looked into public places so far, and the focus has more been on the individual experience rather than the external. So because of this, we decided to obviously do the Sensory Street project, and as part of that, we conducted the research side of it to inform an immersive learning event that can educate the public. So the aims of the research were to examine the types of public places that autistic adults experience as both disabling and enabling due to the sensory environment. To also identify different principles that might underlie whether the sensory environment is experienced as being either disabling or enabling, and also to examine how these principles might be reflected in different public places that autistic people commonly find to be disabling, so we know kind of factors that we might want to adapt. Some of the top disabling environments that autistic people talked about were supermarkets, retail shops and shopping centres, eateries such as cafes and restaurants, healthcare settings, so that included hospitals and doctors' surgeries, high streets and city centres, and also public transport, predominantly trains and buses. We also identified kind of the most common enabling sensory environments from our autistic participants. So these were stadiums, some certain retail shops, cinemas and theatres, live music venues and clubs, museums, and also outdoor spaces. So after we looked at the different places that people find enabling and disabling, we then conducted a reflexive thematic analysis on our transcripts. And this is where we developed themes and sub-themes from trends in the data. And this allowed us to identify principles that underlie whether a sensory environments are experienced as being either disabling or enabling for autistic people. So we developed 6 main themes, and within that was 15 sub-themes. And we designed these to be an internet connected web because there was a lot of kind of overlap between the themes, and this was presented as this web here, which was designed by Emily wonderfully. And this is a quote which also kind of inspired the image from one of our participants. It's like a multitude of things. I always envisaged it as a big spiderweb of things that might affect me in a sensory environment. It's about actually looking at all those little things that build up, being able to reduce those little things as well. So the theme, I guess, that we were most expecting to find was related to the sensory-scape, which we named, which is the kind of actual sensory landscape. So the sounds, lights, smells, things like that you might expect in an environment. A more disabling environment might be those that have higher sensory burden, and in that there might be kind of multiple sensory inputs, or there might be very intense sensory input. And also if that input is sustained and inescapable, it's likely to be more disabling for individuals. But also if they have little control over the environment, so they're not able to kind of limit that sensory input, it's more likely to be disabling. There are other factors related that kind of interacted with this, the sensory input of the environment that could affect whether a space was disabling or enabling. And one of those was the space. So whether it was kind of busy or crowded, and more busy crowded places were seen as disabling, and also those that had a more confined built environment. So that might be that the space, the actual physical built environment made it feel more closed in. So for example, in a supermarket, you might have quite high shelving. Another factor was related to the predictability of the environment. So more disabling places tended to have a lack of information available. So it might be knowing in advance kind of the layout or what can be expected there, or the type of sensory input. Also environments that are inconsistent and unfamiliar were talked about as being more disabling. So that might be, for example, supermarkets, when they tend to change their layout a lot, and it becomes that, an environment that was once predictable can become very unpredictable. And also just generally there being a lot of uncertainty. So the kind of less that people know about an environment in advance or what to expect there would be more disabling.